Good morning and welcome to Meet a Missioner Monday. It is my pleasure to be with you again today. My name is Karen Bortvet Estrada. I serve as the Recruitment and Relationship Manager at Marinola Missioners and will also be your host for Meet a Missioner Monday today. For those who are new to our gatherings, this is our opportunity to check in on our brothers and sisters around the world and see how they are doing in this time. Each week we have a different missioner joining us from where they serve around the world, and we take an opportunity to learn about their ministry, to see how they're doing, and also to check on the people that they work alongside. We follow a similar structure every week, and we'll be asking some different questions, but we also love to hear your questions. So please take an opportunity to put your questions in our comments section. You can find that on either Facebook or YouTube. It might be below this video or it might be off to the side. I am especially excited about today's missioner because Joanne works with restorative justice, and at this time in our world, I just see those divisions widening politically within our church, and especially right now in this time of pandemic, between maybe family members or neighbors or how people are responding. And I think a lot of the tools and techniques that restorative justice offers can be used for all of us to sort of come back to our shared humanity. So I would like to now welcome Joanne Blaney, who will be speaking with us today. Joanne has been a Marinola missioner since 1991 and is working in Brazil. Joanne, thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Karen, and good morning to everyone who is listening. It's certainly a pleasure to be with all of you today, and a passion to talk about restorative justice. So I'm very grateful to be here.
We are excited to have you. So to start, can you talk to us a little bit about how you came to Marinola Missioners and what is your current ministry that you're working with?
Sure. So I grew up in a working class neighborhood in Philadelphia and spent many years as a teacher and principal of urban schools, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C. And during the time, the schools that I went to, grade school, high school, service was a focus of those schools. Service, whether in the neighborhood, service in the church community. And with that, I joined Marinola Missioners because of its focus on direct service, as well as working to change structures that cause poverty, that cause violence in our world. And for me, a question has always been my entire life, how can we bring faith-based gospel values to a world that suffers so much from so much violence, so much poverty, so much inequality, and now I think as well, divisions in our world. So for me, I guess I would say in my life, since being small, service has been important. A faith-based group has been very important to me. Participation in a faith-based community, engagement, accompaniment and engagement with others. It's also very important. And I found this in Marinola Missioners. It would be a very, very long story for me to tell you how I arrived here because I met so many incredible people. But in a sense, that's it, working with urban issues, mostly in the United States. But after that, I participated, during the time I was working in Washington, D.C., I participated in a women's shelter that the Carmelite sisters ran. And at that time, I saw women from many, many different cultures, from Guatemala, from Nicaragua, during the time of the conflicts there, the wars there. And this spurred me on to want to really do service work in another country. And it has been a remarkable experience.
Can you tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing now? And I think you've also brought some pictures to share with us, some of the folks that you're working alongside.
Sure. So Chris, maybe you can begin the slides. So right now I work at a center that uses popular education, which means that we are helping people do processes to deal mostly with the violence, with the poverty in the region. It's a poor community and a very violent one. And this particular center, this is our staff. We have a number of large projects, as you can see. And this particular center was started 39 years ago, and it started out as the Commission of Justice and Peace for the Brazilian bishops in that particular region of São Paulo. And today we are called the Center for Human Rights and Popular Education. So can move forward, next, Chris. These are some of the folks that I work with at the center. And what I would say is the level of dedication and engagement of the staff is remarkable. And it's just been, it has been a wonderful experience, and it continues to be a wonderful experience for me. So next. My work relates to mostly right now restorative justice, as well as work on forgiveness and reconciliation. And this is one of the groups. We give courses around the world. Could you go back, Chris, just for, we give courses and trainings around the world, and the idea is that we are doing the restorative justice experience in these courses and trainings, and then everyone here becomes a multiplier. So this is a group that we just recently worked with in the state of Espírito Santo, and many of them work with education, NGOs, and most of them in the pastorals of the Catholic Church. And they are now, the idea is that then they now will have circles to help people in their area. This is an example of a restorative justice circle that related to conflicts, where we bring everyone together. And I'll explain a little bit more as we move through this, actually what restorative justice is and how it works. So next. This is a restorative justice circle as well in one of our course trainings.
So for those of you that are just joining us, we're talking today with Joanne Blaney, who is a Maryknoll lay missioner who is serving in Brazil, and she's sharing with us some of her work around restorative justice. Remember as well that you can also send in your questions for Joanne and what her ministry is and how she's serving, so be sure to put those in the comments. So Joanne, what is this one here? It looks like a protest or a march of some kind.
Yeah, so this is a march. And besides working with restorative justice, we also do a lot of work with advocacy with neighborhood populations. And every year there are 120 organizations in, when I talk about the territory where I work, we're talking close to 3 million people in that particular territory of São Paulo. And every year there is a march for life and against violence. And so you can see a little bit maybe on the t-shirts here, this was the 24th March. And it brings people out from the neighborhoods, and the march goes to a cemetery. And in the cemetery then, we have a liturgical celebration, remembering all those who have died because of lack of services or have died from violence. This particular cemetery is one that is called Where Indigent People Go. And there are a number of identified bodies that have also been buried there. So this is a very spirited time, and it's something that the Catholic Church is very involved in. So we can go next, Chris. This is just a sample of the neighborhood where our center is located, and the Maryknoll sister who is beside me, Sister Armeline, who was here in São Paulo for a little bit, and we are talking with Jose, who was a staff member of SEDEPI at that time, and he's also a journalist. So it's documenting some of the difficulties here. The state of the houses, you can also see a small stream that goes through there, and extreme pollution in that area. So one part of the work that we also do is working with housing, with health, helping people get access to these services, and also trying to make denouncements where people's rights have not been protected in some ways or honored in some ways.
I'm noticing, Joanne, there's such diversity in the different things that you have been doing in your ministry, but I want to dive a little deeper into that restorative justice piece, because I think that oftentimes it is misunderstood by folks. What does that really mean? At least for me, I think of the circle. When I hear restorative justice, I think of a circle. So can you explain to us a little bit more, what is restorative justice?
Sure, and if we can go to the next slide, this is kind of like a classic definition of restorative justice, and where I work, we work with this definition, but we're also doing a lot of restorative justice work with people in the community. So it's a theory of justice, but it's also a social movement, and it's really all over the world right now, and it focuses on repairing the harm from conflicts and crime. So when there are conflicts, when there is a crime, we know that many people are affected, not just the victim and the offender. Their families, and many times the community is affected as well. And so in regards to restorative justice, the best way to do that, to help people heal from the harm and repair the harm, is to have those involved and members of the community come together in a dialogical process that can lead to individual and collective responsibility, reintegration, and that includes the victim and her or his family. That also includes the offender, reintegrated back into society, and a transformation of relationships. And so it's a process that people are involved in that's very different from some of the processes that we now have in our justice systems, where a victim then, the harm is repaired by the justice system punishing in some way the offender. And many times we see that this kind of punishment many times just leads to more anger and more violence in our countries. So we keep locking people up, or even with communities in conflict, people don't talk to each other, families in conflict. So this process helps bring people together so they can literally do a process. I can't stress enough that it's a process of involvement. And restorative justice practices are informal or formal processes that help people heal from conflicts, violence, and prevent future violence. And these are now being used in church groups, in schools, in prisons, in neighborhoods, communities, in families. The most common formal practices are peace building circles, where we come together, and it may be a conflict, or it may just be that the group is having some difficulties in communication, or we use these as well in crimes, and it's coming together and trying to build peace. And again, this is a key concept of restorative justice, is that we build peace together in a communal setting. Then there are family group conferences that are particularly used for children or adolescents, or a family member that is having a difficulty. And so the extended family comes together to try to deal with the conflict or the difficulty. And the third is victim offender community mediation, where in crimes, we have the victim and their community, the offender and their community, and we come together and we try to, the idea is that we talk about what happened, we go from the past to the present, how people are dealing with this right now, what can we do for the future that this does not happen again. And literally, it's a process that helps people. There's no judge giving a sentence, the victim and offender come together and they decide how the harm will be repaired. So there is great participation of the victim and the offender. And this is what helps victims move forward. In our experience, and in the studies of restorative justice, victims can then say it's over, because many times they live for years with anger, sometimes hatred about what happened. So these are this is what I would say is a good definition of restorative justice and practices. So what do studies show? Studies show mega studies. I'm using just a set of mega studies that were done in varied countries, that restorative justice processes are more effective in dealing with conflicts, helping people heal from these conflicts or crimes, and increasing victim satisfaction, as well as reducing recidivism. So in the prisons, we do restorative justice work, and the idea is that people will be healed, they will admit what they've done, there's a great sense of accountability, there's a sense of repairing harm, but then because I understand better what I did, I understand the implications on the victim and their family, the studies have shown that it reduces recidivism. And in Brazil and the United States, I think this is very important because there's about 70% recidivism rates of people who leave prison and return to prison within 3 years. So the restorative justice studies up till now have shown that there's a reduction of recidivism.
Joanne, one of the things I've always been impressed with in your work is how closely you work with the local communities there. I think from what you've just said about restorative justice, we can see that that's an integral part of any restorative justice process. It can't just be someone coming from the outside. It's about everybody who's involved in whatever the conflict might be. So I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about how you collaborate with local communities there in Brazil, and tell us a few of those stories.
Sure. So this is Cida, who is beside me, and Cida's son was killed in quite a violent action. And she decided that she wanted to do a different kind of process. She did not know about restorative justice, but she wanted to talk with the two people who killed her son. And so she pretty much went on an investigative process until about a year later, she was able to, working with the local police, find who actually did it. Her entire family was against her investigating. And people said to her, your son would not have died if he was not involved in something bad. Nobody kills for no reason. And her family was against it. But what spurred her on was that she saw how this death of her only son was destroying her family, not just her husband, but her extended family. And she was able to do a restorative justice process in which she was able to forgive the young man. In the end, it was a case of mistaken identity, but her son died and the young man was in prison, and she did a process where she was able to speak about her anger and the suffering that she and her family went through. And she spoke about it directly to the person who caused it. And then she listened to the young man talk about how it happened, why it happened, and basically his sorrow that this took place. So it's in that moment that this is, for me, this is the magic, if you want to say, of some restorative justice processes, where before the victim and sometimes the offender, they only are dealing with anger and sometimes hatred of the person involved. And when it comes together, there is a case where empathy gets reborn, because it's a process that people go through. And so she's quite a role model for us where we work, Cida. So that's one case. A second case experience that I would like to talk about was an adolescent who was involved in a robbery with a weapon. And it was a teacher of a school. And it's a very long story. I will just give you the basic facts. When he got out of the juvenile offender center, he went to register at a school, and he saw the teacher there registering people. He didn't know her when the armed robbery happened. And so we left, and he said, I'm not going to go back to school because the person whom I robbed will get her husband or get someone to come kill me. And we worked with him in a restorative justice process, and the teacher also worked with us in that process. And the teacher talked so much about how she just didn't heal from what happened. It was very traumatic for her, especially having an arm involved, a weapon involved, and how it affected her family, how it affected her personal life, and how she just couldn't seem to get over it. And when we did the restorative justice process with the people involved, the teacher said at the end, it's a beautiful testimony. She said, Victor, I invite you to register at our school. I am over it now. This process has helped me be able to move forward with my life. And I welcome you to come. So these are ways that, for me, people help see each other as human beings. Human beings, though, who did something wrong, if in the case of an offense or a crime, who admit that they did it, accept responsibility, and sometimes it's individual responsibility, and sometimes it's collective responsibility of groups. And then try to restore some kind of a relationship so that everyone can move forward with their lives, having learned not to use violence. So this is our hope, and this is what we try to do.
For those of you that are just joining us, this is Meet a Missioner Monday, and we're talking to Joanne Blaney in Brazil. She's sharing some of her experiences with restorative justice there. Remember, if you do have questions, put those up on either Facebook or YouTube, and we will get to those questions shortly. Joanne, I think what comes to my mind as you're speaking is that saying that hurt people, and restorative justice is a way to stop that hurt so that we can keep from continuing to pass that on. I know we're going to talk a little bit about the aspect of your ministry serving people who are experiencing homelessness, but we did have one question that came in specific to restorative justice. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that while we're still focused on restorative justice. Claire Noel asks, how have you navigated doing restorative justice through this quarantine experience?
So during this quarantine, it's been quite difficult. We are offering online work with people who are having conflicts. We are unable to do anything in the prisons at this moment, and so related to restorative justice. But what we're doing is doing hygiene kits and other types of things to help people in prison. But we still are working with some groups church-related groups who are having conflicts, families in conflicts, family suffering, because many families live in very, very small homes where there might be so many in one home, and there's a lot of conflicts that come up. So we are also working with them. Someone on our staff is a psychologist working with psychological help for folks to help deal with their trauma. That would be something like the pre-circles that we use in restorative justice. So we're trying all kinds of different things, women with domestic violence, just trying them online. But of course, we know that only those who have internet access and have decent internet access are able to access our services. So we've been doing a whole lot of other activities and services where I work to help people in the neighborhood, maybe those who do not have any kind of access to internet.
I know one of those populations is the group of folks you work with who are experiencing homelessness, and there have been some creative ways that you have been doing outreach. So could you share with us a little bit about what that work looks like?
Sure. So, Chris, if you could. uh, so, you may know São Paulo has up to 35,000 homeless people, people living in the situation of homelessness or spending their day on the street and going to a shelter at night, although the shelters can only meet the needs of about half of these people. So I am part of a community, a faith community of people who are homeless in my neighborhood, those who now have a room where they live, as well as a number of dedicated people, staff people who work with them. So this would just be a common example in São Paulo. We meet every Saturday afternoon for biblical reflection on the Sunday readings, as well as a celebration, a liturgical celebration, and sometimes a meal, but always a snack. And so it's a remarkable group. I have learned so much about gospel values from this group. And as you can see on our this is our altar. It's a very small place where, I mean, it's not a church. And you can see one of the things, of course, are the bread, the Bible, but the blanket. This blanket is very common in São Paulo on the streets. It's a blanket that the city government, municipal government, and social projects give out to homeless people. So that is always in front of us, the memory of those who are excluded. This is a group, some of the folks in the community, and the gentleman with the red jacket on is Zé Carlos. And Zé Carlos died a number of years ago. And I would just say that from him, I learned so much. He is a person who lived on the streets, showed so much solidarity to people, shared whatever he had with others, would go and check on people living on the street, especially women or children, those who were needy. And this is one of the social projects that works with people in the situation of homelessness. And when Zé Carlos died, we were at the hospital at the time, some of us, and with as his body was carried to the cemetery, we passed over a viaduct, a bridge, where many homeless people live under it, and it was his community of homeless people who lived under it. And the horn was beeped on the car, and people, hundreds of people were below, and just shouting praise and thanks to Zé Carlos. And a number of people walked to the cemetery, which was fairly far away, in order to make their final goodbye to him. So we can move to the next one. This is another person, Claudia, and Claudia is a person who also lives in the same neighborhood. Right now, she is in a situation of homelessness. And again, another person, inspiring example of someone who looks out for others and shares what she has and a sense of solidarity.
Joanne, we do have some more questions that are coming in.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just very moved by these stories of the folks that have touched your life. And I think that's one of the gifts that we receive as missioners, is encountering folks whose paths may never cross with ours if we weren't in mission. And it's amazing how much those can change who we are as human beings. This question comes from Megan Hamilton. She asked about how your ministry adapted during COVID, which I think you've already spoken to, but she also asked, do you speak Portuguese or do you work through a translator for the work you do?
Mm-hmm. No, I speak Portuguese, and this is something that Marinol, as an organization, Marinol lay missioners, this is something that we all learn, that where we go, we learn the language of the people. And all of us here in Brazil, we are working with Brazilian teams, and it has been just a remarkable experience for me. And so with COVID-19, we're doing lots of things from where I work: food, food baskets, hygiene kits for people who live on the street, as well as for people in poor communities, many times who, because of what's going on with the quarantine, have lost their job or worked in the informal economy and cannot continue. So there are lots of families without any kind of a salary coming in. So we are doing that. We have also just working this week, we've identified 10 women who are in charge of their household. They are women victims of domestic violence, and we are going to contract them to make masks so that people can use. And we'll give these masks to people in the neighborhoods. We've also made available services to people in the neighborhood where I work. We called all kinds of services to see, are you really open? Services like domestic violence, services like health systems, health post, is the health post staffed or not? What do you recommend that people do? And so we've just identified a lot of services for children as well, but always checking to make sure that they really are open during this time, and that they are serving people. So, so there's some of the things that we've done.
We have lots more questions coming in. I also want to acknowledge, Joanne, you have lots of family that are watching. There have been a number of comments for Aunt Joanne from different family members. So your folks are out cheering you on from their homes. And another question that came also from Megan Hamilton was if you know of restorative justice programs in Jamaica, or if there's a database of them. And there might be other folks watching wondering how they can find resources.
So I don't know, Megan, about Jamaica. I would not be surprised, though, if there are not restorative justice circles there, or restorative justice processes. I mean, sometimes just going on Google Drive and putting restorative justice in Jamaica brings up some things, but perhaps I can try to find out for you as I have a contact of a person who lives in Jamaica, and maybe Karen, you can see how I could get back to Megan related to that.
Definitely, Megan, we will, your comments on our website or on our Facebook, so we'll see what we can find out and respond to your comment there. Another question from Tim McWilliams. Tim says, I have a friend who was in a conflict zone and once mentioned he was able to feel times that people were praying for him and vice versa. Have you ever had this experience?
Oh, very much so. And I would say a big part when I talk about being part of a faith-based organization is the power of prayer. And it's very connected, I think, to, I try to connect it, integrate it into the work that I do. So just praying together with people experiencing homelessness is powerful. And all the restorative justice work that I do, before we have meetings with the entire group, it's really constant prayer, because it's that a prayer that the Spirit will work, the Holy Spirit will work. And this is what I think happens in these processes, because they're processes of dialogue, they're processes of listening, understanding that someone else can have a different experience of life than me, than I have. And I think this is important in today's world. There's so little dialogue. And that's why I say this for me is our gospel values. But prayer, I think, changes things. And so a big part of what I'm doing for this COVID-19 is just praying, as well as trying to take some actions in solidarity with folks.
Joanne, you mentioned how in today's reality, this can be very important. And a question came from Angel, who's a returned lay missioner. How can restorative justice be applied in today's US context, where Black men continue to be violently and unjustly killed by our justice system? People are so angry and frustrated. Can restorative justice offer hope? How do we start?
So, I mean, because there are similarities between Brazil and the United States, those who mostly are in prison in Brazil also are people of color. And we are working very hard where I am, that restorative justice just doesn't turn into 2 or 3 people who are dialoguing and they come to some understanding. This is very important, and repair of harm. But we are working right now on what we call community restorative justice. And that is trying to deal with the structural problems that cause so many difficulties around our world that relate to racism, sorry, I don't know, gender issues, I guess. Sorry, I'm trying to think in Portuguese and translate, and inequality. So for us, we've taken on, where I work, we have taken on trying to create better restorative justice processes that take this into account. And last year we had communitarian restorative justice, and we had over 100 people who came from all over Brazil, and they are working on these structural issues with communities. And so our hope is to just continue to do that in every one of our processes now. Right now we have, I'm working in a project with 10 justice tribunals in Brazil, where we've been asked to take restorative, train people in these justice tribunals, I hope I'm saying it correctly, in restorative justice practices. And so we are bringing to these groups that we're working with, you must deal with structural problems as well. And racism is one of those, as well as inequality, the way our world is set up.
Joanne, I appreciate the hope that you are bringing to us, because I think there's a lot of folks that are despairing in this time. So I appreciate the message of hope. One other question that did come in from Mary. Mary, I apologize, I'm not even going to try your last name because I don't want to say it wrong. But she asks, how do you deal with your heart being broken time and time again? And I think what you're sharing about hope really speaks to that. How do you keep going?
So prayer again, and knowing, for me, I learned early on when I was a sister of St. Joseph about what is the Paschal mystery. The Paschal mystery is passion, death, and resurrection. And my experience of life is that, yes, there is suffering, but there is incredible joy mixed together. And so just my faith speaks to this, meditation, prayer, but I also believe in that this is life, and I can be very joyful also carrying some of these very difficult sufferings. And a big part of this is what I learned from Brazilians. The incredible joy, the hospitality, the willingness to continue, the Brazilians with whom I live and work, willingness to continue with joy and suffering, incredible suffering, sometimes together. So it's been a big lesson for me, and something that I learned from the Marginal sisters when I was in New York, a phrase, balance turbulence. That's what life is. Nature has a balance, yes, but nature also has turbulence, and so do we. So if we can try to live out, I call this balance turbulence the Paschal mystery, that I try to just integrate it in some way. And of course, I'm on a journey to do, I'm on a journey. I think we're all on the same journey, and that's what unites us. And for me, that's what gives me hope, when I see everyone else on the same journey, pretty much.
Thank you, Joanne. I love that balance turbulence, and will carry that with me, as I feel like there's so much turbulence right now that's happening. I want to take the time to thank you for joining us today on Meet a Missioner Monday. I'd also like to thank everyone who's tuned in and is watching, and a huge thank you. There is a team that puts this together every week, so thank you to our committee that has been making Meet a Missioner Monday happen. For those of you that are watching, I know some of you have experience with restorative justice, and some of you, this may be the first time you're hearing about it. We're going to put a link in the comments from a group called Catholic Mobilizing Network, and it's a page with lots of resources around restorative justice. So if you're just starting out it's a great place to sort of get started. Also, as Joanne mentioned, she'll look into, resources in Jamaica. If anybody watching this does have other questions for Joanne, you can keep putting them in the comments. We will make sure that she gets those throughout the coming week.
Thank you very much, Karen. Thank you, everyone, for your patience in listening and participating.
If you still want to keep hearing stories from Brazil, we also want to let you know of another opportunity. We're going to put that link up here right now this afternoon at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, so 11 a.m. Pacific Time. There's going to be a webinar that's hosted by the Maryknoll Fathers and Brothers, and it is a conversation with a priest in Bolivia, as well as 2 priests and a lay missioner in Brazil, talking about their experiences during this time. So if you'd like to join that webinar, there's a link on your screen to register. We're also putting that link in the comments. So register, they'll send you a Zoom link and you can join for that conversation as well, and keep being in solidarity with our missioners around the world. Next week, we'll be here again for Meet a Missioner Monday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, and we'll be talking with Miss Evie Altman and her mom, Melissa Altman. I'm very excited about this interview because they were actually in my orientation class. We departed to mission together, and they're still serving in El Salvador. So if you do have kids, this will be a kid-friendly conversation focused primarily on Evie sharing her experiences. She went to mission when she was 3 back in 2014. So we hope you'll join us for that. We hope you have a great week. And until then, stay safe, be well.